Hey there, good afternoon and welcome to The Nation. You're with me, Tamina Kauji, and we're coming live from the Bernama News Channel studios. Well, we kickstart this Monday with a focus on early childhood education. Now, did you know that early childhood education actually targets about roughly 10% of the Malaysian population? That's right, 2.6 million is the number of under 5-year-olds that we actually currently have in Malaysia, which is almost 8.0% of the population. So with that in mind, I've got two amazing educators, innovators in the hot seat with me in the studio. I'm welcoming Arjuna Raj, CSO of Little Lives, joined with Brian Koh, storyteller, branding and marketing executive, also with Little Lives, for an essential conversation and a discussion on how we can actually further nurture home and school partnerships for preschoolers, together with perhaps parents' views of teachers and looking at it a little bit differently. Gentlemen, welcome to the studio.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
All right, such a pleasure. So how are you this afternoon?
Very, very good. I think we're excited to be here to have this very important conversation with you.
All right, Arjuna, let's get the ball rolling with you. Tell us a little bit about Little Lives and what is it that Little Lives actually does?
So Little Lives is a preschool management system that was created in Singapore, and now we are serving about 7 countries, 16 cities. So we do everything from the communication between the parent and the school on the child's dietary movements, their health and their learning, which is very, very crucial at that age. So we facilitate that whole conversation and we help create that platform to start that whole ball rolling.
Right, and Brian, your role within this as storyteller, branding and marketing executive, why is it so important to be able to tell the story of your organization in particular? Because generally when we look at education, I think parents really start worrying around the middle school or high school age. Why should it start as early as preschool?
Well, I think the exposure is important. Like, we always believe that everything has a beginning and we should always start somewhere. And I think working in a preschool industry like Little Lives, representing this whole new generation of youth and especially younger children, it is so important to have that coverage, to have that voice. And I guess we're just super excited to be
and you
part
know,
of that.
like preschool education is not mandatory in any parts of the world.
That is also correct.
Yes, and you know, now I can really see that the ministries are really trying to regulate it. But what exactly are you trying to regulate? Of course, the safety of the school,
That's right.
the academic qualification of the teachers. But interesting enough, in all the visits that we have done to different countries, the fostering of the communication between the home and the school is really the hot topic right now.
Right.
And what kind of information do you want to share with parents? So I always say it should be purposeful information, not just random information on the child. It should be purposeful information on the child's learning. So imagine if I'm a preschool teacher and I'm teaching on solar system in the classroom setting.
Right, yes, let's say.
Yeah, and then the parent would then sort of know that's happening and follow that up at home. And don't you think that child will be the one who really benefits from that? Because not only are they hearing it from their parents' point of view, from their school point of view, as well as the parents' point of view.
Exactly.
Yeah, and
so, so things actually become a little bit more integrated, right?
It is,
Brian, tell us a little bit about, so how do we actually start with changing parental mindsets? Because a lot of the time, particularly in Asia, the perspective is, all right, preschool, so it's before school, most likely this is going to behave as a sort of a babysitter or a substitute for being in the home. Just send the child outside for a couple of hours. It doesn't really matter what they do as long as they're safe and they're in company with other little kids.
Well, we believe parents' role is important in the early years, especially a child from the age of 0 to 6, where he or she is actually learning and growing. And yes, in Malaysia currently, or I may say most countries these days, parents don't find the time to really spend time with the kids. They're so busy working, finding money for a future for their children. But they forget that 0 to 6 is such a vital year for these kids, and you really want to spend time with them, like, ask the important questions. How was your day? What did you learn today? And sometimes kids are unable to really respond to you, but day by day we've seen kids who really change the way they talk to parents, and I've seen them like, my day was great. You know?
And I think for that to really happen, right, there need to be a relationship between the teacher and the parent. It is a relationship.
Right. It doesn't really, you cannot really expect, well, a 3-year-old to be the intermediary for that relationship.
You can't. And you ask any 3-year-old child, what you learned today? I don't know, I can't remember.
Yes.
And then the parent's point of view, why am I paying 1,000 ringgit or 2,000 ringgit to send my child to a school? They're not learning anything, but actually they are learning a lot of things. So how do you have to really understand that. I always say a parent is the expert on the child's well-being. A teacher is the expert on the child's learning. I think both parties need to understand each other's role, appreciate it, and work together in a common understanding.
Yeah, so actually bringing it together somehow collaboratively.
Yes.
But what would each one of you say is the main problem in this engagement between the parents, between the children, and the schools?
Okay, I like the part where preschool is not compulsory. I think that's good in the sense that parents have the flexibility to not send their child to a preschool and homeschool them. But at the same time, it then creates a public image that it's not important enough. Early child is not important enough. If you ask any parent, or you see how parents interact with a secondary school or primary school teacher, the amount of respect they have for the educator is amazing. But when it comes to a preschool educator, they look at them as a glorified caregiver.
That's true.
So I think that's a problem. Yes.
Yeah.
And when that happens, right, when a preschool teacher who has studied years to become a preschool teacher, degree and all that, right, and then when she's trying to say something about the child's learning, the parent can be defensive at times.
Exactly.
Yeah, and
so now when you also move on into the deeper viewpoint, Brian, you do work with children, educating as well, and have in the past. In your view, what actually happens if a child misses out on that crucial preschool education stage?
Well, coming from, again, a person who is passionate about education, I think it's so important that a child attends school and receive quality education at the age of 0 to 6. I cannot imagine a child not receiving such values being cultivated into them at such a young age, and I think it would be detrimental to their growth. And I think people need to realize that, and they always say, primary school, secondary, university to a certain extent is important, but really, like 0 to 6 is the years that you want to build someone. Yeah, in fact, adding on to what Brian said, there's so much of research, academic research done, that if a child doesn't learn how to share their toys at the age of 4, they'll be selfish individuals. And I think
it's never going to happen.
Exactly.
All right.
So, it's important that parents understand that. And teachers understand that, because sometimes a teacher doesn't quite understand what they're teaching at times. So that's also a problem. We need to really understand that. So I feel that's changing a lot in Asia context. The Ministry of Education, the respective countries that we've been to, are starting to see the importance of that. They're putting a lot of emphasis, they're pumping in a lot of resources and taxpayers' money to sort of improve the industry as a whole.
So I understand, though, of course, from the industrial aspect of it, but as you brought up the point, and that's very pertinent earlier, preschool is not actually compulsory. So when it comes to, for example, the B40 community, who may not necessarily have the financial resources to send a child, especially a preschool age child, to, for let's say 1,000 ringgit or even a 500 ringgit per month preschool. What would your recommendation, what would your advice be essentially for what such parents can also do at home to ensure their preschooler is not missing out on intellectual capacity, is not missing out on being engaged as well? Brian?
See, I've been very blessed to travel the world, and I've been to countries where schools are unable to financially support kids per se, or like families who are unable to afford to send their kids to school. So what we do is, we have different roles that we can play. For example, as a parent, if I really can't afford to send my child to school, there are certain things that I can pick up on or learn where I can easily share and train my child. And coming as a volunteer who has been to, for example, a country like Jakarta, Cambodia, Indonesia as well, sometimes it's not easy to teach kids in not a proper setting, but the different roles that everyone has to play, including the parents, the neighbors, for example, the community as well, plays a role on how we can share all these lessons with the child. So, of course, we believe it's important a child should definitely go to school and receive proper quality education. But unfortunate events happen, and we just have to make the best out of it.
Yeah, that's the
Arjuna.
African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child.
That's right.
And in Malaysia context, there are homeschools. If I'm not wrong, you don't really need a license to operate from your house if you have below 10 kids in that premise. So I think if you can't afford to send your child to a authorized taska or tarika, then find those more affordable options for you, but also ensure that the person who is taking care of your child for that 7 to 12 hours a day is doing flashcards at least, is actually giving some sort of learning materials to that child, because you don't want your child to just go there and just play without any purpose. I
Right.
think that's something. But I also think as a parent, I mean, there's so much in YouTube now, you have so much of videos that you could watch. There's so much of blogs that you could follow that give you a lot of tips on all that. I think that's something that parents, if you are really focused on your child's well-being, I think you should have that urge to do that.
And
at
if
least.
I may add, people have this mentality where the more expensive the school is, the better the quality of the education, and whereas the lower end schools provide minimal quality, we don't believe in that, because we believe, especially for someone like us who have been visiting preschools around Asia, we see that they only have one goal, which is to give the best to their children. So materials, resources are not dependent on how good they are, how expensive they are, but it's really how you deliver the content and the message using what you have, because kids learn from the basics of the basics.
Yeah, so how much of it actually goes back down to the human component? Let's talk teachers, sustainability, especially in the preschool industry. Now, one thing that I would like to also point out, and it's great to see that it's a lot more inclusive these days, both of you are male. In general, when you think of preschool education, you automatically by default go towards, it's probably a female educator.
Correct.
So how's the
I
industry
think,
changed?
I mean, I don't teach kids directly, I teach the teachers.
That's right.
But I think for Brian's context, he's a very good example of being a person in the industry, being male and breaking stereotypes. There's a manpower shortage in all the countries, in every part of the world when it comes to the early childhood sector. And if you don't tap onto males, you are never going to have enough teachers. But of course, I think public perception of male teachers might not be perceived so well. But you see, if you go to primary and secondary school, parents have no problems if it's a male teacher in the classroom. But I guess if you really address the parents' concern and ensure that the female teacher does the diaper changes and the shower and the nap time and all that is handled by a female caregiver.
All
and
the
at
hygiene parts
The
of it.
hygiene part. And at all time there's always a female presence in the classroom. I don't think that's a problem anymore.
Right.
So changing the perspective. And I always tell Brian, we both love going to preschools because all the kids just run after us because there's hardly any male attention.
It's
that
seldom,
they get.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we always say that we feel like Jay-Z and Usher and all that when we're in
I
school.
guess it's also a stereotype where they say, males generally are not sensitive enough, are not caring enough, or
Right.
emotional enough.
Not
But
able to provide that for the
yeah,
children.
exactly. And I beg to differ. I mean, as a male in this industry, I've seen male teachers who are also giving their 100% to the school, to the children, and really taking care of them. And I think it is a stigma we have to break, and we all play a role to break that very stigma. And I'm glad that as a male in this industry, we are doing that in our ways.
That's
Yeah.
right. So the education industry is shifting itself. Now let's go back to that point you were making about, flashcards, and there's lots of resources, especially online. I'll kickstart the conversation first on digital overuse and toddlers. Okay, your perspectives, Arjuna.
Yeah, so I run a tech company, right, and technology for preschools, but yet we don't advocate a child to be using technology so frequently.
Why?
Okay, I feel they should really get their hands dirty. They should be playing, they should be learning, they should be interacting with their peers. They should be trying to snatch a toy from their peers and then understand the importance of sharing, as opposed to just focusing on watching a YouTube
screen,
video and screen and just downloading information from that and not interacting with the human connection, not making eye contact.
You made a great point earlier about motor development for
Yes,
children.
yeah.
Can you just help share that with
Yeah,
us?
so for example, a child goes to preschools and a lot of parents think, why is my child playing with plasticine and Play-Doh all the time? But they forget that without playing with plasticine and Play-Doh, they're not able to build the muscles here that help the child hold the pen this way.
That's
If not,
right.
they're always holding the pen or crayon this way.
Correct.
So same goes for technology. If the child is so used to just swiping left or right or tapping on things on iPads, it's a problem because they're not going to build the muscles that they need to hold crayons, to color, to write for exams. I mean, there's so much. There was an article that I read in New York Times about older kids not be able to sit in for a 3-hour exam, written exam, because their hands get tired.
Ah, there you go. So it comes from somewhere.
And this is like
It starts somewhere,
teenagers. And you know, imagine like this generation of young kids who are playing
able
with
to
iPads.
sit down.
But that's why I always believe a good preschool should have more toys, more books, less technology.
Right.
Yeah.
So there you go. So on that note, though, I mean, I will get back into the rest of that because this is something that needs to be discussed further. But we'll be back right after the commercial break. Stay tuned. Hey there, welcome back to The Nation and our discussion today on nurturing home and school partnerships for preschoolers. So, Brian, as I was asking earlier, now on the flip side of things, how do you deal with preschoolers who are already in the system, but because of perhaps their home background, they're actually suffering from digital overdependence? How do you wean children as young as 3 to 5 from digital dependency?
I think it comes down to the role that the teachers play in school. Really setting parameters for the parents, talk to the parents, communicate and say, hey, firstly, I think your child is over-depending on technology, unable to get away or stray away from the using technology, or is too focused on using this device, basically, right? And I think at some point, we need to say, parents, you need to play an active role and say, set a time limit. After 1 hour, you're not allowed to do this anymore. Go out, have fun, play. Like, you know, it's interesting enough to see that sometimes children are going out there and really enjoying themselves because they haven't seen what's outside, you know, going out there. They're so stuck in that small view. So what happens is, as a parent then, you know, a teacher communicating with parent, having that home and school partnership will then help to push that away.
Yeah, and imagine if you have a teacher who has to take care of 20 kids.
That's right.
And there's one child who's so technology hungry and so dependent on it, right? That child would probably make life a bit difficult for the teacher in the classroom.
A little
setting.
disruptive,
Yeah,
perhaps,
disruptive behavior, and not only for the teacher but for their peers.
Very true.
So if the parent trusts the teacher's opinion, in that case, if there's equal mutual respect, that addresses the problem. So it really boils down on that as well.
Yeah.
So it's all ecosystem. Everything.
Exactly, it's a
chain
cycle as
reaction,
well.
actually.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because what often happens is, especially I think, it's not just peculiar to Malaysia, but whenever you go out at night, particularly you're at the mamaks or you're at a restaurant and you see not just the child, the toddler, but the entire family hooked onto the devices.
Yeah,
the
I think we're
worst.
all guilty of that.
We're all guilty of that.
But I think at that age, they should really be getting their hands dirty. They should be really experiencing life the way it should be.
That's
And
right. But on the flip side, though, when we speak about special needs children, especially at the preschool level, how does technology, digital especially, help them to develop?
Yeah. So for us, the only time a child interacts with Little Lives in terms of the technology part is the check-in app. That marks attendance for the child. So for example, when the child comes to school, they're excited about taking a photo. And that's something that really pushes them forward. But when it comes to a special needs child, it's hard for them to interact with their peers. They get very nervous, they keep to themselves. So sometimes having the iPad as the mediator between the teacher and the child, that helps. So I'm not saying all technology is bad for a school, for a child, but depends on what kind of setting. So if you ask me for a child on the spectrum, an iPad would really work in that sense, because you also want to ensure that the child is learning things and not just left to a corner in the classroom.
And it sort of consolidates their attention as well.
Exactly.
Right.
So it's a really a balance, a fine balance. But I think if a teacher is able to address that balance and appreciate it, he or she should be able to
Integrate it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Brian, now going back into creating the best environment for preschoolers at school, what would you recommend as some of your basics, your top 2 or your top 3?
So I've visited a lot of preschools around Malaysia, Singapore, and Vietnam. I think really there is no best environment. It's really how, again, I said, make use of your resources. Whether you are a school who's charging 2,000 ringgit to about a school who's charging 50 ringgit a month, it's really having the environment that you create with the best ability that you can. So I would say I'm a huge fan of play-based. I like a school that cultivates the idea of playing with toys, going outside, playing with water, like sand. and having different corners perhaps.
All those tactile things.
Exactly, like really having a space where a child can have an adventure. So starting with mathematics in the corner, going to a language corner, to going to a science corner. So having that space with the resources that you have will definitely help the kids grow.
Yeah,
Right.
and going on to spaces, right? It's also
Sure.
important for a child to have personal space within the classroom setting. So even having a little cardboard box. But of course, the teacher should still be able to see. But the child
Yes,
would
so it's
assume
safe,
that the child will still assume that they're hidden from the adult view. But in actual fact, the teacher can still spot that, because sometimes we all just want to hide away for that 5 minutes to just recharge.
And a little privacy as well.
Exactly. And
Right.
imagine for a preschool child, there's always an adult looking at them 24/7.
No, interesting enough,
Yeah.
yeah, I've seen a school. They don't do detention. They don't. Of course, we don't encourage any schools to like scold their kids. But then this school has like a reflection corner. So
Right.
anytime
A thinking corner.
a thinking
Okay,
corner. So
I like that.
anytime you have any things, like you go to the corner and you think and you reflect. So it really cultivates the value of
That-
thinking.
yeah.
Right. So Arjuna, how would you compare early childhood education in Malaysia to the other countries in Southeast Asia, particularly the ones that you have actually gone in for trainings and you've got a lot of experience there?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been blessed working for Little Lives that we're in 7 countries and visited over 1,000 over schools. I wouldn't say any particular country is the perfect model of early childhood. I think everyone is working towards that model. There's no such thing as perfection in that sense.
What's a good progressive working model that you've
I
come
feel,
across?
going back to the topic, proper communication with the parent is the first step. Second thing is documenting what the child is learning is important.
Right.
That's a step often missed out by a school.
Especially with younger children, right?
Exactly.
Because, oh, you're only 3.5. Why do we need to know what you learned yesterday or last month?
Yeah, but interesting enough, I see a shift, especially in ASEAN countries, where primary schools, whether it's public schools or international or private schools, they are requesting for primary 1 admission to have a scrapbook of the child's learning in their taska or tadika or preschool. I think that's a way to move forward, because that changes how people view preschool education. It also allows a primary 1 teacher who has now 40 kids.
Yes.
Some who have not gone to preschool because it's not mandatory. Some who have gone to perhaps a more private or elite school. Some have gone to a quieter school, right? How do I then manage 40 kids if I don't even know which level of their ABCs, their grammar, their vocab are they?
Yes,
at?
very challenging for the teacher.
It is very challenging. And we know once you go into the primary school context in any Asian country, it is competitive.
Yes, and it's very rote learning based as well.
Exactly, and then you have exams at the year end, and then if the child doesn't pass that exam, then they are streamlined to a different stream.
Very true.
And,
right. So going
yeah.
back into the preschool model, though, Brian, what would your recommendation be for on the flip side? There's also a lot of helicopter parenting that goes on, whereby you've got parents who are absolutely obsessed with wanting to detail not just the minutiae, but perhaps also it ends up restricting the child's creative as well as developmental freedom.
Well, my thoughts on it. See, I have, of course, family members who are helicopter parents, and I've seen it live. I think trust the system, trust the cycle, trust your school. You're sending your kids to a school where you trust, and a kid is spending about 6 hours to 8 hours a day at the school. You can't be expecting, to really check on your child's progress every single hour, every single minute. Our advice, because we've seen how teachers work, they are passionate individuals. They know their roles, they know what they're doing. Really trust the system.
I want to add on to what Brian said, because you mentioned about helicopter parent. I see it more of helicopter principals.
Right,
where
okay.
they control what happens in the class, in the school setting. That's important because they're the leader of the school, the organization. But when it comes to the individual classroom, they try to restrict the teacher's creative freedom. And if I'm a preschool teacher, the reason why I'm a preschool teacher would be because I like that creativity, I like interacting with kids. But imagine if I'm then told to reduce that part, follow a script, follow a
That's not going to
curriculum.
happen easily or
It's
overnight.
not. And then that's when you lose people who are passionate.
Very true.
And you have a very sanitized environment. Not saying that's bad. You need to have some structure. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have structure. You do need some structure, but having a good balance.
Yeah, sounds like balance is really the key. Now, as we're drawing towards the end of the show, though, what would you say, Brian, is one of the most critical needs for early education, by and large, regardless of the institute?
I agree, Arjuna. I think communication is one thing that we really need to emphasize on, especially in the early childhood sector. Having a proper and quality home and school partnership will improve kids and what they receive on a daily basis by heaps level. And really trust the system, as I mentioned in the beginning, really having that understanding, that mutual respect between parents and teachers, because at the end of the day, it's the children that you want to benefit from.
That's right,
And
exactly. They should be the center of it.
They should be the one that, the ideal model of what you want to achieve at the
Right.
end.
Arjuna, very quickly, what would you say is the biggest critical need, and how would you hope you can address it?
For the preschool sector, I think exams, worksheets shouldn't be done. I do see that happening in some of the countries that I go to.
I do have a lot of colleagues who do have little children, and well, their favorite thing to do is give the children worksheets to do, especially in holidays, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think for primary and secondary school, I mean, I'm not an expert in that level, but for
Right.
preschool, I would say that needs to change. But having said that, I think Taska and Tadika should shift towards progress reports, evaluation
Right.
checklists, where there are certain milestone 3.5-year-old child should achieve in terms of their gross and fine motor skills.
Exactly.
So those are milestones that, I mean, seems parents want something to be graded. In that sense, it's more of being evaluated, not good, very good, but more of being evaluated. Yes, I've observed the child's able to do this.
Right,
I've
brilliant.
observed the child's able
So
to
over
skip.
there, Arjuna, Brian, thank you so much for
Thank you.
contributing
Thank
to the
you.
conversation
Yeah.
today.
Thank
And I
you
hope
so
the
much.
parents out there watching us have gotten that bit from this show as well, that allow your children to play and keep the lines of communication open between home and school. I'm Tamina Khalji signing off on The Nation. We'll see you again next round.